Minutes past 9 here on the Radio Wammo Breakfast. Time for the New Scientist feature with Janine Young joining us in Melbourne City today. Hello, Janine.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. Now, very shortly, we're going to be talking about the fact that the sun is entering a very busy period and bombarding the Earth with solar activity. But first up, some research into how people are able to achieve a focused state. That state, when you really feel like you're switched on, the conversation's flowing, or the intelligence is a little bit above normal. Some research into how to achieve that more regularly, perhaps.
It's also mainly a sort of a physical kind of thing. When you're, as you say, at the top of your game, when everything feels like it's just coming together, when you know what you're doing. It's called flow. It sounds a little bit hippie,
yeah.
A little bit, out there, a bit zen. But in some respects it kind of is, because researchers who've been looking at this have been talking to elite sports people, really good, strong professional musicians, people who are able to just make things happen, people who are really good at making their business flow, literally. Yeah. And each of them has said that there are 4 things that happen when they're in the zone, when they have flow. They have the most intense and focused absorption. They lose all sense of time, and time goes really quickly a lot of the time. There's something called auto-elicity, where they find the activity interesting and rewarding for its own sake. They don't have to necessarily get anything out of it. You find your sweet spot, that their skills are perfectly matched to what they're doing, and that they're neither frustrated nor bored. It's just working for them. And this kind of automaticity, it's really hard to say, but it's kind of automatic, like a piano playing itself, for example. So I think you'd agree that most of us don't feel like that. I know that I'm not that coordinated or that talented.
Especially this time of the morning.
No, I must admit mornings are never my thing, but I think anyone who's been listening to the show for a while knows that I'm not a morning person. It gets better over time, but only just. Yeah. But there are potentially ways to be able to help ordinary folk like you and I develop some of these. Sorry, I didn't mean to lump you in with
No,
you.
I am certainly. I'm certainly one of those ordinary folk. Yeah.
Good. Ordinary folk like you and I. There are potentially ways that we can actually get into the zone. We can get flow, being able to focus externally. So you don't think about it too much. If you're swimming, for example, you pay attention to what the water feels like around your limbs instead of paying attention to your stroke. So that's a really interesting way that you're actually trying, in some respects, to turn off the really analytical part of your brain. It could be that you're switching off self-critical thoughts, like, I am rubbish at this, it's not going to work anyway, why am I bothering? Well, that's never going to help. So being able to switch that off is always going to be a bonus. But also looking externally seems to do really good things for people. There's a process called neurofeedback where people are asked, they have electrodes and the like on their brains, they're asked to pay attention to a signal on a screen in front of them, and they want to get a particular type of waveform on the screen so they can physically see what their brains are doing. It's a visual process.
Right.
And so being able to control your breathing and being able to do this process of getting your brain waves right also helps to be able to get you in the zone, to get flow. And finally, there's a type of transcranial direct current stimulation. Yes, they put electrodes on your brain and they run a current through it. Scary, but it actually seems to work, because people are able, not just people who are trying to be trained as snipers in particular, are able to recognise objects more efficiently, more quickly and more accurately. And it's actually working to be able to train snipers.
That's a very specific skill set, isn't it, to train to be a sniper?
Yeah, well, it's an example I know about, and so, but I would imagine that, if you go for some type of transcranial stimulation, then you want to be very specific in the reason you're doing it, because I don't like the idea of parts of my brain having a current run through them.
No, indeed. Would it be fair to say, does the research mention anything about, I guess you did when it comes to swimming, where you're not necessarily concentrating on the task at hand, you're sort of feeling it, you're vibing it, as opposed to really concentrating on the specifics of the task. Because when you start, don't you feel when you actually start concentrating on a specific, that's when you actually start mucking up and doing things wrong?
I did it last week. I'm driving a manual car again after years of driving on automatic. We've just bought a new one. And I was concentrating too much on how do I drive my car.
Yeah.
And it failed. I stalled. And I've been driving since I was 18, 17.
Yeah.
That's a long time now. And so I'm going, oh, God. So, yes, if you concentrate too much, you just mess things up because that automatic muscle memory, effectively, and dancers talk about this quite a lot, that the muscle memory that you have is part of that automaticity. It means that your body knows what it's doing and you don't have to think about it too much. So that is part of the equation. And just not thinking about it. Don't overthink it. You see footballers do that when they're lining it up for a goal, for example. You sit there going, no, you're thinking too much. Stop it. You can see them doing it. It's a very physical process that somehow manifests on their faces and in their bodies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, moving along, and this was in the news last week with the Northern Lights and I guess the Southern Lights doing their thing, but we're probably going to be hearing more about this solar activity throughout the rest of this year.
That's right. The sun goes through active and less active periods. There's solar flares and the like that happen all the time, but there's every 11 years or so it becomes more active. Now, you and I have actually talked about this before, so it's one of those things that we could hark back to what we were talking about, but in this case, the concern is how much the Earth is going to be vulnerable because we have a lot of electronic communications. Any of the magnetic flares that are thrown out from the sun can really do quite a lot of damage by way of hitting electrical circuits. The fact that we have a lot of transmission lines and the like in electricity that are now running on smaller currents than they were before actually makes them a lot more sensitive to any magnetic radiation that's coming through from the sun. It's actually quite counterintuitive in some respects, but it means that the grid, which is also aging, kind of gets a double whammy in some respects because you have this massive effect that comes through and you get blackouts all over the place, which people don't tend to like and they notice it quite well. The other thing that these solar flares can do, these massive magnetic storms can do, is to fry satellite communications because they have very little protection. They're way above any of the protection that's provided by the Earth's atmosphere. And obviously we're more prone to this at the poles because you have even less there. But these satellites, if you take them out, that means a lot of our communication, navigation, weather forecasting, all the things that we just rely on satellites, GPS, potentially could be affected. They could even reset them so that they don't work the way they did before. People on the International Space Station, there are more of them now than there were 11 years ago. So potentially they're in a little bit of trouble because they get a higher dose of radiation than they do normally. What's really interesting is that there's a whole bunch more planes that are now flying over the North Pole. And as I said, you're more prone and more susceptible to these magnetic storms at the poles. And it means that with that happening, again, you're open to your communications and your navigation being fried.
Sure.
So the airlines can't run their aircraft over the North Pole. And so they're having to divert them, which means hours more flight time, lots more fuel, therefore more cost. And there's more than 10,000 flights a year running over the North Pole as opposed to 368 last time round.
Now, as far as I understand, the scientists say that, of course, this solar minimum, maximum, it's not out of the ordinary. It does happen, and there's nothing particularly unusual about this current maximum, that it is just going along the trend. In fact, it's not probably as fierce as, say, it was 11 years ago.
And that's the thing, because the sun is actually calming down a little bit. Some of the maxima that we've expected before haven't been as high as you would have thought, and solar flare activity has died down over time as well. So something is changing within the sun, but no one's actually entirely sure what that is. And no, this is not unusual. It's part of the sun's natural cycle. It's what it does. What's changed is the amount that we're relying on electronic communication and how vulnerable we now are. And we've changed, not the sun. Yeah,
this is true. But I guess maybe we should take some comfort in that. I know there doesn't seem to be very much alarm out there about any of this. The authorities don't seem to be all that concerned, but then again, maybe really just no one knows.
That's a possibility too. But there are certainly going to be a number of people out there going, okay, we've got to be prepared for this because this is actually quite a big deal potentially.
Yeah. Well, as long as
you don't really know until it happens. And there are satellites and there are other scanning pieces up in space, but Some of those only give you really accurate warnings an hour out.
Yeah.
Some of them are accurate to 13 hours, which is great. But the strongest storms, they can't be predicted until an hour out, because the monitoring system that we have doesn't see the magnetic pole, the polarity of the plasma clouds. So unfortunately, we can't know for hours beforehand to be able to shield everything, reroute planes and all that sort of stuff. So they're having to take precautions knowing that something is coming. They just don't know how strong it's going to be.
Sounds like what will be, will be. Janine, thanks very much.
Hey, Sarah, Sarah.
Janine Young is in Melbourne City, and she joins us from New Scientist there, and you'll find those stories in New Scientist magazine coming out this week, and also on New Scientist